Welcome back to another episode of Harmonious at Lunch, the show that fuels your business success. I'm Brandon Gano, your host and guide through the world of harmonious business growth. Today, we're unlocking powerful strategies with industry experts to help your business thrive. If you're a business owner, entrepreneur, or executive, you are in the right place. Join me and our incredible guests today on the journey to clarity, growth, and success. It is time to revolutionize your approach to business. Let's dive in with another episode of Harmonious at Lunch. Welcome back to some more bite-sized business advice. In today's episode, we're talking about a topic that's kind of a buzzword, but we have someone who's been in the trenches and has actually done it to sell a company, grow multiple companies. It's servant leadership. We have a new, I think, very interesting take on it, again, from someone who's been in the trenches and practiced it. John McCarowitz, welcome to the show, and thank you for being here.
Oh, so glad to be here, Brandon. Thanks for having me.
So I personally love this topic, but I really do believe it's a buzzword and people just want to throw it out there and say, oh, we believe in servant leadership, but we don't really do anything about it.
Yeah.
So let's start there and just dispel any myths. Do you see the same thing, and how do you feel about that topic, at least as a buzzword?
100% agree. It's like culture, right? A lot of people like to talk about it, but at the end of the day, whether we're talking about culture or servant leadership, the leader at the top has to show up and they have to basically honor that before anybody else, right? And so I do think it's definitely one of those buzzwords, but it's something that takes a lot of focused effort and attention if you truly want to live that lifestyle of leadership.
Yeah, number one way to kill any culture is do as I say, not as I do, right? From upper leadership. So tell me about your path here, because you're not a quote unquote expert in servant leadership. You haven't necessarily written books and preach about it. You have done it and experienced success. So tell me how you kind of stumbled upon this and really put it into place in your companies.
Oh, absolutely. So really it started when I first got into my career, and I actually worked for somebody that was the opposite of servant leadership. Now, interestingly enough, I still fondly remember the time. The person taught me a lot about sales. They taught me a lot about client experience and customer service, but they were just somebody that just everybody was under the thumb. And so I was kind of able to strategically understand what he needed for me to sort of allow me to not be under his thumb, right? So he was, you and I were talking before recording here, big into behavioral assessments and sort of understanding people's core human behavior and how they sort of react in their natural environment when they're at rest, so to speak. And so he's just somebody that needed all the details. So I learned that if I just give him all these details and almost overwhelm him with detail before he asks the question, then he'll leave me alone. But that's not really a great place to work at the end of the day. I found success and there was a lot of positives that came from it. But that's often how I just try to look at life, right? Even with adversity, you learn something. So what really happened is I joined up with my business partner for my first company that we ended up co-founding together. And he was a servant leader. Now he was a hard driving, results oriented, we set massive goals. And, so it wasn't like some kumbaya, oh, let's just be nice to everybody and everything will work out. But, he just got to know me as a human being. Now, I originally worked for him once again in a sales capacity, but was quickly kind of given some management responsibilities. But just observing the difference between my first, sort of boss and then this new one, I observed how it made me feel and how it was just a much more productive work environment for myself, and my results improved. And so, I think that was really the key component there. And then further from that, once again, we have big, ambitious goals. And so when he put me into management, I knew enough about myself to know, I'm not an expert in marketing. I'm not an expert in these things. And so, going out and reading a lot and getting to understand as much as I can about these different, sort of segments of the business, so to speak. But what I quickly learned is that I can study all I want, or I can just go find somebody who's really good at this job and bring them in and not allow my ego to get in the way of making that right decision, right? Because I do think sometimes leaders have, sort of a mental block because they're worried, especially if they're not at the top, right? That maybe if I bring somebody in underneath me, that they're going to maybe, basically make me look bad potentially, or that I'm not smart enough. And so once you get that ego in check and you realize, no, it's about finding what I call, it's really through that book, Liz Wiseman wrote Multipliers. It just stuck with me years ago. And my main takeaway was, as a leader, I should be talking less. But the bigger component was finding people that multiply our results, not just simply add to the results, or gosh, even sometimes subtract from the results, right? Maybe a toxic person. So, servant leadership to me is about, walking the walk, talking the talk. And so, that was really, I think for me, when that clarity came, what I learned, and this goes back to culture, which we touched on, another buzzword, is, it's not just etching, the values in granite on the doorstep, right? I mean, we all know Enron had like integrity and trust and all this stuff etched in granite in front of their headquarters, right? And look what happened there. So it's not only about having a strong culture, you really have to define it and you have to live it. So one thing we've done at all of my businesses, so the previous one and then the most recent Ferris Capital Partners, is we've actually defined our values into definable behaviors. And so it's the things that we have to do at the top before anybody else does, right? So show up on time, pick up the phone if there's a conflict situation, never overpromise and underdeliver, create an experience. And so all these things we can kind of keep going on. But by having that clearly defined culture and then showing up and doing the same things you're asking people to do, you'll get that servant leadership and you'll get that lift from your people. So, great example, and I'll pause and get back to you, is, we were actually at one of our apartment buildings that we recently acquired, and we had a new property manager. And, as soon as I got on property, I just noticed there's some candy wrappers and some cigarette butts blowing around on the ground. And so I just grabbed a trash bag and started scooping it up as I walked in and investigated the property. And I could have gone in there and been mad about it, but I didn't. I just went and said, hey, just got on site here. I had this little paper, plastic bag in my car from, the gas station or whatever. I picked up some trash here. I think it would be good if you just got on a cadence on a daily basis of walking the property and doing this every day. Do you think you can commit to that? And they're like, absolutely. Now they're probably embarrassed because I came in with a bag of trash, but instead of screaming and yelling, it was an opportunity to learn and teach, but also to show I'm not above picking up trash either. Neither should you, right? This is all of our responsibility. So those little things add up, man. And I think that that's what, in today's culture, especially the millennials that I think sometimes get a bad reputation. In my experience, I guess I'm like the world's oldest millennial. I was born in 81, but I don't necessarily identify with that. But I will say I've had tremendously awesome millennials work for me, but they want a sense of purpose and they want to know what they're doing is contributing to a bigger goal. And so servant leadership is really the pathway to that.
I fully agree with that. And I love that story too. As a millennial, you might be Gen X. Don't quote me on the time.
It's always hard. I've also heard the Oregon Trail generation is what they call me, but I guess
I haven't heard that one.
It's sort of like that in between from 78 to 82, where we sort of had computers growing up, but not the internet. So maybe that. But anyway,
that's funny. No, but I mean, I have seen that. I think the phrase "act your wage" comes from the millennial generation. Which, first of all, I just want to say I don't identify with millennials. That's not a good way to be. But I have found in companies I've owned and run, and even other companies that we've consulted for, you're spot on. I mean, just having a purpose and helping them see the bigger picture. Everybody, it's not just millennials, but it's such a fundamental principle that we often overlook as leaders, as business owners. It's stuff you said, defining the core values, core behaviors, but then actually living it. And saying here, your role of being a property manager contributes to the success of this company and the comfort of all these people living here. That's so important. If you could just walk around and pick up trash, that would be amazing. That would make all these people who live here feel better. Like that's those right. Little things, instead of just saying, hey, dummy, pick up the trash. This place looks like garbage. Nobody wants to be treated like that.
That's right. Yeah. Assign a sense of purpose to it. Show that you're not above it. And I think that, to me, when I think about the millennials, right, and I'm not the first to observe this, but 9/11, the Great Recession in 2008. Now, depending on how old they were, they might have even, caught their parents dealing with the .com bubble bursting, right? And then you add the pandemic into the mix. And so, most of their lives have been nonstop disruption and sort of black swan events, right? And so, I can understand, and I had a bit of that where I was thankfully already in my mid to late 20s when the Great Recession hit. I was at a place where I was making a really good income, but I hadn't yet put a lot of money into the public market. So I didn't personally feel, the downturn in that way. But I saw so many friends where their parents, were close to retirement and then had to bump out the retirement 5 more years. And then, of course, you watch the news and you see all of a sudden these pensions they thought were in place vanish overnight. And so, if I were a young person seeing that happen to my parents, which once again, mine were a little bit older and navigated a little bit differently, but I would probably question the logic of giving 30 years to a corporation if that's the end result of what could happen. And so, I applaud the millennials in that way for saying, you know what, like, I'm not going to just go get a paycheck. I actually want to be a part of something and feel like connected to something. And so for me, like, I think if you're a leader in this, era, especially today, I mean, gosh, we've had 20 years of this stuff, right? And you're not embracing this a little bit, and approaching leadership in that way, you're probably really far behind, even if you don't know it yet, right? For us, we were talking prior to the podcast, for me, what I learned in business, if you want to just really put it to a fine point, it's to spend all your time hiring the right people. If you're in a leadership position with the company, or if you're the entrepreneur who owns the company, if you just put like 60% of your efforts on the front end into interviewing and finding talent and bringing the right talent on, but then the next step is making sure it's a great onboarding experience and you have training and you have support to give them the tools necessary to find success. Everything else becomes so much easier, right, at the end of the day. And to a certain extent, like, we have a wide range of people working for us from many different cultures and backgrounds. I mean, some of our team members are in Canada, some are in the US. Once again, from a demographic standpoint, very vastly different, but there's some commonality in the values we share, like how we like to be treated, how we treat others. And so at Ferris Capital Partners, right, we serve our investors. Like, at the end of the day, our investors invest in the deals that we do. We go buy old apartment buildings and fix them up and sell them for a profit. So the investors are really critical to our success. But what we learned is, actually, if we focus all of our attention on the resident experience at the property level and make sure they have an incredible experience, walk into their home at the end of a hard day and they're not going to be stepping over cigarette butts, like, those little things absolutely take care of the bottom line, right? And that's the investor. And so it's that Costco philosophy: hire great people, they'll take great care of the customer, and then in turn, the customer takes great care of the shareholder. So a lot of what I've learned from reading about others who have found that success. I'm a big reader, as you could probably see behind me. And so just going out and reading about other leaders that have exhibited servant leadership and learning about what they've done. John Wooden is another guy I like quite a bit, the NCAA basketball coach from the most winningest, but from the 50s and 60s, just that idea of just focusing on the team and giving them the tools to be successful, and then being there to support them and clear the decks, right? It's what it's all about.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of small business owners, entrepreneurs in particular, where, we're a different breed, first and foremost. We have to acknowledge that. But you start your business in most cases, unless you're very well funded, which is incredibly rare, you start the business doing the work. That's and that transition, there are multiple inflection points, if you will, growing a business. Your first hire is for sure the hardest hire. Mm-hmm. But then as you scale and now you have a layer of management, now you're managing just people, not even outputs. Those people are managing the outputs. It's hard for entrepreneurs to shift. And like you said with John Wooden, to be able to say, my role is to serve people, not to serve the end user, because those people will then serve the end user. It's a difficult series of transitions, but those who do it well and do it effectively have by far the best businesses. It sounds like you've done that several times. I'm curious, if we flip this and look at from the people perspective, the employees, your team members. Have you ever seen people who maybe have some level of PTSD with the bosses who you say, people are under their thumbs, and then they come to work with you, or in this type of environment where the leader's not belittling them for making a mistake and yelling at them and threatening them with things, but they're actually they're kind of apprehensive to even embrace the culture, if you will. Have you ever seen that?
100%. Yeah. In fact, I'm thinking of one person in particular at my prior company. And we've stayed in touch since I've left. And, I was actually just a reference for her. She moved on to another opportunity, but she sent me this beautiful text message. She said, John, when I first started working for you, she's like, I wasn't sure if I could believe you. She had a really negative experience before. And she said, you just kept saying good is okay. It doesn't have to be perfect. Just get something out there. She was actually in charge of our training and development. And it was, good plan today is better than a perfect plan tomorrow, quote we've all heard before. But, just kind of saying it's okay if you make a mistake. Let's just get something out there. Let's train the agents on it. Let's do a survey. Let's get the feedback, and then we'll make adjustments going forward. And so it took about 6 months for her to really get there, and believe me. But, here we are years and years later, and 2 years after I left the company, she sends me a text. She's like, I tell my kids that every day. I tell my kids that every day. So it's a real thing. And, PTSD may sound like a strong word, but I have a woman who works for us right now who at her prior company, some of the stories she's told me, it actually really makes me angry. I'm like, this person should not ever be in charge of anybody. Just bullying, rude, talking behind their back to other employees. And this guy's the person at the top. They're the leader of the company. They're the owner of the company. And it's just, so unfortunately in business, bad people can also be entrepreneurs too. Right. And so I'm not saying I'm a great person. I think I'm like, human being. I make mistakes, and, I've absolutely said the wrong thing at the wrong time, just like everybody else. But it's like what you do about it. Right. And how do you own that mistake? In fact, Brandon, I've even been accused by in a fun way, but he would come to me and say, John, this wasn't on you. Stop taking ownership of it. You didn't do that. And I'm like, I know, but I'm their boss. So I take responsibility. Right. And he's like, I hear you, but this was kind of their thing. Right. But, I'd rather be the one to take ownership too soon and start thinking about how are we fixing this problem versus pointing fingers and blaming. Right. At the end of the day, life's too short for the blame game.
Absolutely. Yeah, I love this. I wish more people adopted this philosophy of servant leadership, not the buzzword kind, but the actual embodying of the term. If you were to talk to somebody who maybe is like that person who just had an awful experience with a boss or with leadership, what would you say to those people in terms of maybe finding another job or when to know this is just not the right fit for you? Because I feel like a lot of people get quote unquote stuck in those jobs because they just think, if I'm working for somebody else, it is what it is.
Yeah.
So what would you say from your perspective, talking to somebody who's maybe hearing this and needs a little bit of direction?
Yeah, goes back to life's too short. That's my view. Look, life is tough out there. Things aren't getting less expensive. We have inflation to deal with. And so people that maybe 3-4 years ago were making a great income now maybe are paycheck to paycheck, and they're still making the same amount of money, right? And so that's not lost on me. So I know it's easy sometimes to say, well, just go get a new job. But, I think the first step would be to provide feedback. To me, feedback is a two-way street, and to go to your boss. And, one thing that I found works really well, Brandon, is when I'm frustrated or I almost feeling emotional about something, I just write the script down in my head, what I plan to say. And then I sit on it for 24 hours. Right. So if you're thinking about having that discussion with your leader, your boss or whatever, that's maybe, being rude or ugly or, kind of under the thumb, so to speak, writing it out. Because what you'll find is that once you get it on paper, it's a lot of the emotions go away now. And then you could just get to the facts. So it's I've never actually read that script, if you know what I mean. It's it gets out there and I'm like, all right, okay, I'm calm now. Now let's have that meeting. And expressing what you need. Hey, as an employee, this would be really helpful if I received this from you. Now, on your side, I know you need X, Y, Z. And so I'm going to do my best to deliver that on a daily, weekly basis, right? So I know you want these reports done this way. I'm going to do that. But on my end, this is what I need from you to be most effective in my job. It's okay to have that conversation, because guess what? If that conversation goes sideways on you, then for sure now you're in the wrong position. Because once again, in the companies we work with, I'm not above feedback. Mark Ferris is not above feedback. He's my partner, and his name's on the company, right? If he does a webinar, we all hang back afterwards and we all give feedback. We're like, hey, that joke didn't land well. Maybe we need to cut it down from 50 minutes to 30 minutes, right? And so it's all about that continuous improvement. So, if that goes negative, then your answer for sure, but you might be surprised. Maybe the person doesn't realize they're doing it. And what I've learned is that empathy is understanding that whatever pain or frustration somebody is causing you is likely causing them 10 times more pain, right? Or there's something happening behind the scenes. So you may find that, maybe in a vulnerable moment, they open up and say, I didn't realize I was doing that. I have some stuff going on at home. It's not to forgive the behavior, but it's just to say, okay, so how do we go forward from here? But, look, I'm a big believer in, you've got to find the right culture that works right for you. And I'm a big believer in, it's not about the person, it's about the team. And so, look across sports. There's some teams that have these cultures that you or I might find offensive and like totally not for us, but people thrive in that culture, right? Other team cultures, you might go like, man, they're always like hugging and kissing and high-fiving, but if they get the results, what does it matter? So finding that culture that works for you is really important. And so I think, you and I were talking about some of the tools HumanOp offers. It's like really doing an assessment of yourself first and like going, what is it about me that makes me unique? What are my skill sets? What are my behaviors? Where am I most comfortable? And then going out and finding a job that, has that, right? And matching your values with the company's values. So, look, I know that right now, unemployment is still low, but it's ticking up. So, it's got to be a thoughtful process and you got to make sure you think through it. But my advice would be to start with having a conversation with your leader. And once again, if that person, gets angry and cusses you out, then for sure you need to make a change, right? But Brandon, I mean, is that kind of like does that gel with like what you would be thinking too? Because to me, I think it goes back to feedback is a two-way street, no matter who's the boss or who's, the employee or whatever.
Yeah, it's funny that answer was absolutely spot on. Couldn't have said it better. Wouldn't have said it better myself. And I agree with you. Most of the time, it's the stories we make up in our head that are actually the problem. And you can have that conversation and it can go fantastic. And then you leave like, why was I worked up about this for 4 months for no reason? Because it was all fake. But yeah, if you have to find a new job, you have to find a new job. If that person's just not a good fit. And thank you for the shameless plug. If you know yourself and you know where and why you get triggered because of someone else's behavior, that's our whole goal, is to neutralize those conversations so that we can take the emotion out of it and objectively say, oh, this person's triggering me because they just need more information than I like to provide. I can do that though. It's very simple, whatever that case may be. But John, I appreciate you being here. This is a fantastic conversation. I wish more companies were like yours. But if the listeners want to reach out and want to learn more about you, your company, maybe even working for you, who knows, where should somebody go to learn more about you?
Yeah. So you can go to Faris, capitalpartners.com. So it's FARIS, capitalpartners.com. You can look my name up on LinkedIn too. I can guarantee you there's probably only one John McCarewitz on LinkedIn, maybe two, but certainly you'll find me. And, give me a buzz there. Or if you go onto our website, as I mentioned, you can click on a button to book a call with myself or any of the team there. But, John at FarisCapitalPartners.com works too. But yeah, feel free to reach out. We are looking for talent as we grow and scale. So you never know what the future could bring. But if you'd like to learn more, those are some great places to start.
I love it, John. Thank you. For those of you watching and listening, all of that is in the show notes down below. So go check that out, click around, and we'll be back tomorrow with another episode of Harmonious at Lunch. Make sure you are a servant leader, though. Re-listen to this episode. I can't even stress how important this is. We'll see you next time on Harmonious at Lunch. Thanks for listening to another episode of the Harmonious at Lunch podcast. Make sure you subscribe on whatever platform you're on, and we want to invite you to join us in the Small Business Success Facebook group, our private group where guests and listeners come together to grow your business. We want impact-driven entrepreneurs who are ready to go to the next level in this group so we can all share ideas, collaborate, and grow our businesses together. Go to whatif.com/group, and we want to invite you to join today. See you on the next episode of Harmonious at Lunch.